Good morning. Hello and welcome to the sixth session of DAC6 Academy, our 12-week webinar series. I'm Ali Kazimi and I'm the Managing Director of Hansuke. And as for the audience, I would welcome your comments and active participation. Please start by clicking on the chat button on the right of your screen and do introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from. If you miss anything, don't worry. You will have access to the on-demand recording straight after the webinar ends. Additionally, the slides can be downloaded, and of course, the events team at Hansuke is ready to help if you wish to contact them directly for any of the materials. Over the course of the series, we are bringing you expert commentary on the highly complex DAC6 regime. DAC6 is the most significant development in the tax transparency agenda to date. Once it is fully operational, it will dwarf both FATCA and CRS. We at Hansuke specialize in simplifying complexity for our clients. And today's show is no different, as we look at the pivotal role technology plays in complying with DAC6 reporting requirements. Reporting is an essential part of the compliance program. However, it is often overlooked or left to the last. So to ensure that it is kept at the forefront, we have invited one of the leading authorities in the field. It is my great pleasure to invite my friend Fabrice Chatelain of BearingPoint. Fabrice has a background in IT with 17 years spent with BearingPoint and 3 years prior to that as a specialist software developer for banks. Fabrice is currently the product lead on FiTax, which is BearingPoint's tax reporting functionality. And he operates across offices in France, Sweden, Switzerland, and his headquarters, the RegTech unit of BearingPoint, is based in Germany. And those of you who have attended our webinars before, we've decided to add a new feature to our webinar, and it is the show and tell feature. So as my guest, welcome Fabrice, and tell us what have you brought for us as part of the show and tell.
Hi everyone. Hi Ali. Yeah, so you asked me to prepare something in a show and tell format, and when I was preparing it, I realized that for once, I would be able to explain a part of my work to my kids, and it was fun. So I decided to bring and to show a Swiss Army knife. I felt it represents several aspects of myself, my role, and our product. But let me explain you why. So first of all, I'm based in Geneva, Switzerland, which is not only where we develop our tax reporting software for the last 20 years, but of course, it's also the home of the Swiss Army knife, a tool which is emblematic of Switzerland. But the knife also represents me pretty well. Over the last, 20 years, I had worn many hats within the software and regulatory areas. I started, as you mentioned, 20 years ago as a software developer, and then I did some business analysis on both compliance and tax topics. I've managed some projects with clients. I took part to some commercial activities and contractual negotiations, and now I'm managing a team of experts across all those domains. And I'm happy to still be able to dive into those complex topics. So in this context, I see myself as a kind of Swiss Army knife of the software development in the financial industry. Moreover, the Swiss Army knife also reflects very well our software offering itself, FiTax, which has its own tools and modules for the reporting, including the DAC6 reporting, which has been designed to cover all the aspects of the regulation, from identification of potential arrangements until the submission to the tax authorities or to third parties. But Ali, to be honest, the best part of a Swiss Army knife is the corkscrew to open a bottle at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. Why don't we start talking a little bit about, BearingPoint is obviously a venerable name in this industry in the area of tax reporting. And what I wanted to ask you, invite you, is to tell us a little bit about BearingPoint, and particularly its legacy in building tax reporting solutions.
Yeah, sure. At the end of the last century, we were actually still KPMG Consulting, and then we became a unit within KPMG, and the company being renamed in 2001 to BearingPoint. In 2009, following a management buyout, we became a European partnership, and BearingPoint now operates in 22 countries with over 4,500 employees. And within BearingPoint, we now operate as part of our wider RegTech team with over 600 people. So we have been providing tax and regulatory reporting solutions for over 20 years, long before the RegTech name was used as much as it is today. And with our tax reporting team, we created the first module of FITax in 2001 to cover the QI, so Qualified Intermediary Reporting. And since then, we have added new tax regimes, including FATCA, CRS, and now DAC6. We have significantly increased our countries coverage with over 130 countries covered, and many features are added every year in our tool. So this is a bit where we come from.
Mm-hmm. If I may just explore that a bit further, and if you could tell us a little bit more about, how did FITax itself come about, and the product evolution. You say you started back in 2001. The QI. With every platform, anything that you do, there are some underlying principles.
Yeah.
And I want to just understand, what is it that drives that product set? What are those principles?
So you're right. Because we're based in Switzerland, we initially were already working with banks in regulatory reporting area. And when tax regulation came, and the first one we've been working on has been QI, driven by the US, our clients were looking for software to cover this. And since then, we have been following all those regulations for the financial industry. Initially, it was only banks, but now we are covering reporting for many different kind of institutions and many different kind of tax regimes.
Okay. And so specifically, the tax regimes that you talk about, I mean, presumably that's things like the Savings Directive, the C-Dot.
Yeah, exactly. So we started with QI, then we have added a reconciliation module, then we've created the Savings Directive module that has been replaced by the automatic exchange of information. Yeah. When FATCA came, we created the FATCA module, and also the UK FATCA, the famous C-Dot UK FATCA module. We've also created over the last year several modules to cover local reporting in various countries, and obviously we now have this DAC6 module to cover MDR. So as you can see, regulators are keeping us busy.
Yeah, and there's already talk of, as you know, DAC7 now, yeah. And I'm surprised, at a time when DAC6 hasn't been implemented. We're talking about deferrals and things like that. There's already discussion now of DAC7. So, would you say it's just keeps on giving?
Well, yeah. As I mentioned, regulators are keeping us busy, New regulations are coming locally or globally. It is the case with BEPS project and also with initiatives such as TRACE, driven by the OECD, where the first implementation is now starting in Finland. And moreover, I would say that we are now in the, let's call it the COVID context. And from our experience, we traditionally observe impacts on taxes and regulation in time of crisis. The governments try to improve their income, starting with the taxes, and therefore, well, they adapt existing regulation or they come with new regulations. It has been the case with Obama, who introduced FATCA in 2008 after the 2008 crisis, and then the G20 implemented CRS for the same reason. So we expect changes in the existing regulation as well as new regulation as a result of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I take that point, and I think, of course, there's a general trend, a 20-year trend that you can see that's being played out in front of us. But DAC6, I mean, sort of like, as I said, from my own experience, my own career, I've never seen anything like this. It is by far the most complicated, and I just do not think, as you rightly point out, the exchequer, the tax authorities there, they don't have the money, and they're going to have to fill this gap. And will DAC6 be doing this? And yes, of course. But the question that I have is, because it's so complex, and that's why I always go back to big underlying philosophical principles. What is it that underpins the principles, the considerations that you have taken into account in building your solution, the fee tax solution?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. Even with our long experience in tax reporting, DAC6 was really not like anything we've done before. Indeed, the regulation is very broad, it's complex, and it is country-specific by many aspects. So after 20 years in this industry, and thanks to our partners, we have close relationship with tax authorities in many countries. And in 2018, when the first draft of DAC6 regulation was still in discussion, we started our analysis. And quickly, we realized how broad was this regulation. And this is when we came with, I would say, 4 design considerations. The first one, it is by opposition to QI, FATCA, CRS, DAC6 is not much about the data, account balance, incomes, but it's more about processes. And from some aspects, it's actually closer to compliance than to pure tax reporting. So our first design consideration has been to create a module focusing around the users and the processes. And this is why we have implemented some collaborative features. We have also implemented notifications, workflows, and we've designed features to ease the life of the users, such as dynamic questionnaire, such as data quality checks, and so on and so forth. Then our second consideration in terms of design has been the standardization, I would say. So this is a key strength of FITAX, of all the FITAX modules, where we monitor and we analyze the guidance of the various countries. We created modules with a lot of standardization. And if we talk about DAC6, what we've done is we've created a strong standardized platform, on top of which we've built some country-specific features. And those country-specific features enable the users to manage on a standardized way some regulations, including within DAC6, that may be different in a country and in another country. But I'm sure we will come back to this topic.
Thank you very much.
About yeah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I just dropped off. We're having our own IT challenges in the Kazimi household. So my apologies. Please continue.
So I was explaining the four design consideration, and I'm now talking about standardization and how do we embed all the business rules in FITAX so the users can rely on the product regardless the countries and regardless their kind of business. So the software is there to help them, and it's a very standardized approach. Now, the third design consideration is about the scalability regarding the regulations. So just as with the other tax regimes, over the time, DAC6 and the local aspect of DAC6 will continue to evolve. It is clearly not a one single shot approach. So governments will soon start receiving the data, then they will become more specific about their needs. Also, on a technical point of view, they will have implemented some initial IT solutions with some checks and constraints, and all of this, the regulatory part as well as the technology part, will evolve over the time. And to keep up to date with those local implementation can be very challenging, can be very time consuming for a company who would decide to do this internally. And in RegTech at BearingPoint, we have the chance to be able to mutualize our efforts and to work with a Big Four partner and its global network to make sure we are always up to date with the ever-changing regulations. And if I may add a last design consideration we had, I will go back to my Swiss knife analogy. First of all, we've decided to offer FITAX both as an on-premises deployment and as a managed services on the cloud. Moreover, on top of all the regulatory and business topics, we have embedded in this module many different features to help the users. This includes manual and automatic data acquisition, country-specific decision trees, plausibility checks, templates, dashboards, of course, resubmission and correction features, white labeling, audit trail. Audit trail is so important in this context that it's really a must-have. And we also created some technical features such as REST APIs, machine-to-machine submission, and some side features such as reporting to third parties, the management of the proof, and so on and so forth, not talking about security aspects and so on. So the Swiss Army knife is part of our design process within FITAX. And it allows the users to use the software in the way that is the most useful for them and to focus on things which are the important ones, such as the data and the reporting. That was a long answer to your question, but
no, very helpful. And I think it's those features, those underlying principles that give one an understanding of how that functionality is to be supported. Now, specifically talking about functionality, one is really around the flexibility, because I think that's part of the challenge of operationalizing DAC6. You know, when you've got, I was doing a webinar a few weeks back where we were discussing, the different deferrals. So where you went from 2 phases into 3 phases. Some countries have gone in, notably Germany and Finland haven't gone in. So, how do you handle this in FITAX, this differential sort of like arrangements from different jurisdictions? And in fact, we have a question as well, which is sort of like saying there's obviously the DAC6 for the 27 jurisdictions, but on top, there's also non-EU jurisdictions such as Jersey and Guernsey who have got DAC6 equivalent MDR sort of like arrangements.
Well, to answer this question, I propose just we look back for a second. when the automatic exchange of information came, the name is a common reporting standard with 2 words suggesting a certain level of harmonization. However, we know for sure now that we had many deviations in the various countries in the implementations. Now, DAC6, first of all, DAC6 came from the MDR standard of OECD with already some significant deviations, additional hallmarks, no thresholds, and so on. So it was already a deviation from something. Moreover, DAC6 is a directive. So by nature, the countries has to transpose it locally. So it was obvious from the very beginning that some deviation would appear. And we may take one example here about a deviation. If we look just for a second about the main benefit test, in most of the EU countries, the cross-border arrangements are reportable only. Some cross-border arrangements are reportable only if they meet the main benefit test for some of the hallmarks. This test, if you remember well, and I'm sure you do, it's met when we obtain a tax advantage within EU. But some countries, and we can look here at the Netherlands, they decided that, well, the main benefit test would also apply if the tax advantage was outside of EU. On the other hand, the Dutch tax authorities aligned with interpretation about tax advantage with the UK position, which indicates that arrangements in line with an intent of a law shall not meet the main benefit test, and therefore tax advantage intended by the Dutch tax authority are unlikely to be reported. Poland also implemented different requirements for the main benefit test, and we could continue here for hours about the deviation in between the countries. So all those examples show that not only here we've been talking about regulatory differences, but also on the technical side, we have some deviations. So therefore, from the very beginning, we decided to create a solution with a very strong and standardized framework. And on top of it, we've built the country-specific features. And this includes dynamic questionnaires, country-specific rules, plausibility checks, of course, the generation of the XML files according to the local formats, and the submission channels to submit directly the deliveries to the platform of the tax authorities. So all those specific aspects are embedded in the software.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, it's interesting you raised the point about even the interpretational elements of something which is common, like main benefit test, differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We discussed this last week when we were discussing, the securities industry, and in fact, a few weeks from now, we've got Jonathan Schwartz sort of like coming in, just talking specifically about the differential on the MBT test. And, I can completely understand, as you say, sort of like one thing is to have people giving different interpretations, both advisors and tax authorities, but another to try to operationalize it. And, and that probably brings me to my next question, that you've got these variations and so on. So how should and why should actually sort of like, financial institutions should be incorporating DAC6 sort of like software solution rather than working with their tax consultants?
Well, first of all, I want to say that tax consultants can play a role in DAC6 projects. And on our side, we deal with advisory firms like yours, Ali. So those are two different aspects. Now, if I would list the 3 main advantages of using a software solution from the market, I would start first to say that as a vendor, we are fully committed to the tax reporting. I would say it's our only focus, whereas consultants are used to switch from a topic to another topics. here on our side, we are dedicated all our efforts into building a standard solution. And this standardized aspect is an important one because it gives the assurance that when you press the button, generate my reporting, many other financial institutions are pressing more or less at the same time the same button, and it gives you assurances about the quality of the outputs we are generating with a standardized tool. Now, the second advantage is that vendors, at least vendors who are maintaining the business rules, such as we do at RegTech, those vendors have to maintain the tool over the time. So because we embrace standardization in our software, we also cover, well, making sure the software is always up to date with the regulation. To do this, we are working with a Big Four company, and we have the chance to be able to, I would say, mutualize our efforts. So we monitor the change in the regulation of the various countries, and we implement one standardized solution that is used by all our customers. So we can do this because we mutualize the efforts. And finally, I would say for financial institutions, the main advantages of having a solution rather than working with externals is to keep the ownership of the data and the processes. And this is a very important topic when we are talking about tax data. And I think this is only possible with an on-premises or a cloud-based solution operated by the user of the financial institutions, potentially with the help of some tax advisors or tax consultants. But this know-how should should stay within the company. And it's also true to keep together a clear audit trail. So the software must help to keep an audit trail. And I'm often used to say that with DAC6, it's even more important to be able to explain why an arrangement has not been reported and the decision behind this decision than to report another arrangement. So the ownership and the independence are, from my point of view, some very important topics.
Absolutely. And I think I would echo that completely. I think there is a role to be played by both parties in a different setting. And if we respect that, we actually get the best solution. And I think, things like what you mentioned about a very clear audit trail, particularly recording what has not been included, becomes really important. And that documentation process is what, ultimately tax authorities are going to look at. And I think sort of like the role of the specialized consultancy firms, they're good at interpretation elements. But when it comes to, as you say, running technology, in my 25 plus years, I can tell you, having spent a lot of time in Big Four, consultants, as you say, our attention span is not really around supporting products, IT solutions, and, it's just asking for trouble, It doesn't start at the beginning. It's sort of like after the second or third year, once the sort of like the rubric, the underlying schema begins to change, and that's when you start seeing sort of like the relationship becoming a bit more strained, because consulting firms aren't in the business of supporting IT solutions. So let's leave it to the experts, I say. Now, on that particular sort of like thing is one thing I've highlighted is the ongoing maintenance is a challenge. But are there any other challenges that you foresee in supporting a complex product like, the DAC6 module in free tax?
Well, I would not call these challenges, but I may highlight here some lessons we've learned. Because even after 20 years in this industry, we are still learning a lot every day. So compare with QI, FATCA, or CRS, as I mentioned, DAC6 is less data-driven, And even if we still have customer who needs to report large volume of arrangements and who need our automation features, the main aspect of DAC6 is really to identify and to document very well the potential arrangements. And this is why, as I mentioned before, from the very beginning, we have created a process-oriented module to guide the user step by step through the assessment of each arrangement. So we have a powerful and country-specific questionnaire to help the user to document each arrangement. Now, if you picture this step-by-step process with a workflow, with questionnaires, with notification, multiple users involved, and so on and so forth, it could look like a pretty manual process. And this is a lesson learned. And that's why we have implemented in Fytax some fast-track features for the advanced users. So those features allow the users to skip a part of the assessment when they know upfront what the arrangement is about. And Fytax can also learn the most common arrangements and create some templates. Therefore, the next time the user will have to create an arrangement, they may rely on those pre-populated templates. So both the fast track and the templates are helping us to avoid the purely and very manual process, but this is reserved to, I would say, advanced users with strong tax knowledge.
Yeah, I like your classification of, putting the previous regimes like FATCA and CRS more focused around data and DAC6 being more around process. I think that's a really good, insightful classification, and that then determines the tempo of the work. And one particular area that I think sort of like, we're currently doing a lot of impact work with all sorts of firms like private equity houses, asset management, banks, and so on. And one challenge that's, the legislation, the regulation is completely silent on, or says very little, I should say, is, when you have a situation of multiple intermediaries, and it's very broadly defined as, the term intermediary. So there are no real protocols of talking to each other. Also, the actual sort of like the vision that they have of each other, of an arrangement, differ greatly. And the actual nature of the intermediary differs. How do you handle this with so much, sort of like different business models, different, visions and perspectives and so on?
Well, yeah, indeed. So you're touching on two topics here, if I may say. On one side, intermediaries with different business are impacted by the same regulation. That's the first point, and I will come back to this. And the second point is intermediaries regarding their business may have to work together about on some arrangements and to exchange information. So that's a second topic I will try to cover in a second. Sure. But going back to the first one, yes, the need of different intermediaries will be different depending on their business, their activities. And the private bank in Luxembourg, the tax advisor in Germany, or lawyer in UK don't have the same needs. And we have very different types and size of clients with Fytax, including some tier one financial groups, but also many medium and small size companies in various areas, such as bank, insurances, lawyers, tax advisors, security service providers, custodian, and so on and so forth. And if each of them have different needs in terms of features, that's why we have this Swiss knife army approach where they can pick up the feature that really match their needs.
Yeah.
So I would also say that the needs differ depending on the volumes of arrangements they may have to report. Indeed, processing few very complex arrangements where a lot of documents are needed, where a lot of data is needed and needs to be collected from various sources is really not the same as managing hundreds of almost uniform arrangements. On one side, the users need to support, the software needs to support the users in the assessment of the arrangement, in qualifying the arrangement, in collecting all the needed information for audit trail purpose. And on the other side, the users need a lot of automation to save time and to be able to quickly manage hundreds of arrangements with very small differences. So that this volume aspect is one major difference is regardless the business of the intermediary. Another criteria is about the international scale. So some intermediaries are active in one country and some intermediaries are active in more than one country. And as soon as you have a business cross-border in more than one country, you will need a certain standardization in the tool. You don't want to have one tool per country with different processes, different screens, and so on and so forth. So you need standardization, but you also need the tool to be able to manage your country-specific aspects. And maybe to illustrate how FITAC deals with those two dimensions, the standardization and the country-specific aspect, we can look at another deviation in the regulation. And I propose to look at the legal privilege depending on the countries. So in most of the EU member states, if an intermediary is bound by legal privilege, the reporting obligation shifts to the relevant taxpayer.
Yes.
In this case, the intermediary is required to notify either other intermediaries, and this is a case where we may have several intermediaries involved, but also the taxpayer that the reporting obligation rests with them. Yeah. Now, if we look at Germany opted for a different approach to handle the legal privilege. Indeed, the steps to go through depends if the taxpayer decides to waive the legal privilege. Yes. So we have different cases. The first one, the intermediary will need to do a full reporting to the German tax authorities in case where the taxpayer releases the intermediary from any legal privilege. The second case is when the taxpayer will need to make the full reporting to the German authorities when he or she chooses not to waive the legal privilege. And here we can have some case where still the intermediary wants or propose to help the taxpayer in preparing the reporting. So this is what we call reporting for third parties. And we have also cases where the taxpayer has not waived the legal privilege and has decided not to make the full reporting himself. So the intermediary needs to disclose all the design-related information regarding the arrangement, but without the name of the taxpayer. Then the intermediary does the reporting to the tax authorities, receive back arrangement identifier, pass this arrangement identifier to the taxpayer, who needs to submit the second part of the report and to disclose the personal information. So again, it's a different process, different countries, different process, and here we need to help intermediaries to deal with this. So it's one of the aspects of the different needs of the different intermediaries. And now you also raise the topic about what if several intermediaries are involved in the same arrangement? How do you deal with this? I would say it depends a lot. If the various intermediaries are in a closed ecosystem, talking with the other, or not. So with FITAC, we have several features to exchange information with third parties, including with other intermediaries, and also to collect the proof that another intermediary did the reporting, so you don't have to do the reporting yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, as I said, where the legalistic, there's differences like you highlighted with Germany, UK, about the the legal privilege aspect of it. But the multiple intermediary situation is an interesting one in that and I like the term you use, the ecosystem that they have and where you are and how much information is there shared amongst within the ecosystem. But what we're having to do practically as part of the impact or implementation work is actually develop that ecosystem. So you're establishing communication pathways and things like that. And I think that probably, again, would add, when I think about the kind of work that you do, you define it as a process. So things like workflows and so on, would you care to comment on that before we move the discussion on?
Well, yeah, I can elaborate maybe on the workflow part where, because DAC6, we see it as a process from the assessment of an arrangement until it's reported or not reported. And we decided to split all those steps in a workflow to allow the users to, well, first to focus on some steps and more they progress in the workflow, more they collect information in order to be able to qualify those arrangements. And the workflow also helps to work with multiple users. So often the knowledge is not sitting just with one person or with one unit. So that's why it's important to be able to have several users, several persons involved in classifying an arrangement. And maybe I will zoom a bit in terms of process to the end of this workflow process.
Please do.
So the end of the process is usually, we see it just as creating an XML file and that's the end of the story. But we know, also because of the experience we have, or thanks to the experience we have with the other tax regimes, that creating the file is usually not enough. You need them to submit this file to the tax authorities. So some countries have some machine-to-machine communication portals where the software can connect and submit automatically the delivery to the tax authorities, receive back a notification with identifiers or acknowledgement. And this is an important part of what we call the post-reporting, because it's what we do after the initial creation of an XML file. And we're also seeing that being able to amend or correct arrangements, it's also an important topic, because you may realize that you've reported something wrong and you need to amend it. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with the identifier you may have received in between? So all those aspects about the post-reporting and the exchange of information on an automatic way with the tax authorities are some very important topics, and we have embedded those features in FITAX.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a really practical issues, and I think we are thinking about these type of operational issues coming out, because where you have multiple intermediaries, I may have reported under one ARN and another intermediary goes and gets another ARN, coupling them together and things like that. And these are very important areas that I definitely think if we had more time, we would explore further. But I would like to there's a question and I would like to attend to that. And I think it was on the back of the question or the comments that you were making about the differential interpretations, particularly in the area you were talking about legal professional privilege. But whatever guidance that you're getting in a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis, it is becoming now localized. So it is beginning to check. But up until now, we have had only one source, which is one directive. The question that has been posed is, do you envisage that there will be changes to the directive itself?
Well, so first of all, you're right. The main changes we see those days are deviation from the directive in the different countries, and this will continue. So it's not a one-time topic. It will continue. It will evolve. It has always been the case with the other regulations. The countries, the governments are well, they look at what the others are doing and they say, oh, that's a good idea. We'll also implement this or that. Now your question is more focusing on the directive itself. And if you look at the directive, in the directive itself, it's planned that every 2 years, the EU Commission will review the Annex 4, in which we have the definition of what needs to be reported and so on. So yes, the directive is planned to evolve also at the EU level. And we know that by experience, when the model directive will evolve at the EU level, then each country will need again to transpose those changes locally. And again, they may deviate from the initial directive, or they may deviate the one from the others. So we expect those changes to come in the next years and also to be transposed in the various countries.
I mean, one interesting area is, again, we're working currently with a restrictive directive, as you say. It excludes certain things, it omits certain things. Notably, it does not include the definition of EU taxes, does not include indirect taxes or customs duties. So that's one obvious one that could easily be expanded. The other area is where UK initially tried to do was to broaden it and not restrict it to EU taxes, but also third country taxes, which then subsequently it pulled back from. But, if, say, for example, the OECD's MDR project widens, then that could easily be relaxed and you could get non-EU sort of like taxes or, base erosion challenges also coming in if, sort of like Australia decides that, look, this is a really good thing. We want to be part of that,
That's a good point. I think it's also linked to a question I don't think I've answered it about the Jersey and Guernsey part, because initially DAC6 came from the MDR, the OECD MDR, and the EU Commission extended it. But still, the MDR is live in some countries, such as Jersey, Guernsey, and some other country, South Africa, and also countries in between MDR and DAC6, such as Gibraltar, have implemented some guidance, and those countries are outside of EU. And with FITAX, we also cover those countries outside of EU and implementing not the DAC6 part, but either the local aspect or the MDR aspect. Now, the point you mentioned is, will the OECD take the advantages of this DAC6 part to also make some changes in their own MDR to go further than MDR, because MDR is focusing only on avoidance of the CRS and opaque structures, when DAC6 is going further. So it's going beyond this. So we may see in the next year some changes also at the international level outside of EU, and it will be very interesting to follow.
Yeah, I mean, the BEPS project is ongoing.
Yeah,
it has, the final report on Action 12 is there, which gave rise to obviously the MDR. But I think there are bigger challenges. We've seen some unilateral movement, as you've seen in areas such as digital taxation. And I think that whole movement is just likely to grow more and more. We haven't yet seen the output from what people, what they've seen as part of the, say, for example, the country by country reporting, CBCR. And I think once tax authority starts seeing that, they might ask for more information in what is now, if we can call the MDR plus, or the specifically the DAC6 areas. Yeah. We have one more question, which is in relation to different solutions for different customers. Cutting across industry sectors.
Yeah.
And, is that something that and I can tell you at the moment I'm looking at this is, say, for example, in a bank or a custodian bank, it's about transaction volumes.
Yeah.
In an asset management setting, it is more around the arrangements. It's about who your intermediaries are.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, does the tool have that flexibility to be able to pick those nuances up?
Well, yes. So the answer to the question is yes. We can. You can use a tool for asset management, wealth management, as well as for the other industries. That's one of the key principles we had when we created the tool, to be able to cover the full scope of the needs, from large banks who have large volumes and who need a lot of automation, to asset managers or to lawyers who need to, well, qualify more precisely with more documents, some arrangements, and to define if it's reportable or not. So we really have the full scope of features, allowing different kind of companies to work with the tool. Yes.
Okay.
So the answer is
I'm just conscious of time, so I will ask you a very important question, because we have, as a firm, we have close links to academia, and we get both tax authorities dialing in as well as universities. So tax technology is the buzzword, RegTech is the buzzword. And in fact, if you look now, UK's HMRC, the tax authority, is not looking to hire accountancy and law graduates. What they're looking for is tech guys. And you've had obviously a big career. You came from technology into taxation. So what advice would you give to sort of like people coming in?
Well, I would say the double competency of IT and taxes is great to have those days. We see an increase in the complexity of the regulation, in the speed of the exchanges. So I would say IT solution, tax technology must serve all the requirements of those regulations and ease the pain of the financial institutions. So if you ask me about my career in the tax and technology area, first with the tax aspect, I'm used to quote Benjamin Franklin. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. As I never felt motivated by a career of undertaker, I opted for taxes. And together with taxes, the IT side goes very well together. So you cannot avoid taxes, and you cannot do taxes without the technology. So it goes very well together. It's what I've seen over the last 20 years. And from what I see now, I don't see this changing over the next years. So I would say it's very exciting to work with tax technology, RegTech. It's a very interesting area. It needs to, well, we always need to keep up to date and ahead the changes in those two areas. The regulatory on one side, the technology on the other side. And when we manage to bring together those two aspects, it's great, because we achieve something here, and I like it. And maybe to take an example, on top of the usual on-premises version of the FireTax software we had for many years, we now have developed the cloud-based solution. And we have integrated some very nice technology, such as REST APIs, state-of-the-art encryption, authentication features, a lot of connectivity, a lot of security aspects. And I love to see all those technology deployed to ease the life of the users. So I would definitely say, yeah, go for the mix of IT and taxes.
Sure. We have a request that's come in regarding DAC6 in Switzerland, and we will definitely get back to you on that. I'm just conscious of time, and we're coming towards the end. And if I can, Fabrice, sort of like ask for any final thoughts that you may have to offer our listeners.
Well, first, I may quickly try to answer this question about the specific, DAC6 in Switzerland. So Switzerland is not part of EU. Nevertheless, we are in Switzerland. We are close to many financial institutions in Switzerland. So all the institutions who have offices outside of Switzerland may be impacted or are impacted by DAC6. And then even some Swiss-based entities are also impacted when they want to offer a service to their customers. So if you have a European customer impacted by an arrangement, and as a Swiss entity, you do not have any duty to report yourself. That means the reporting duty defaults on your client, on this taxpayer. And some intermediaries in Switzerland offer services to their clients to prepare the reporting. So that's one way of seeing things from Switzerland.
That's a really good point, actually. If I can just come in, is I've seen this as well, where you've got, say, for example, at a very simple level, a private bank account in Switzerland with a UK taxpayer, and there may be a UK accountant or lawyer involved. And what the bank has done from a competitive advantage, from a commercial thing, even though they're outside, they've said to the UK taxpayers, look, why don't you do the filing, but we will generate all the information for you. So I think that kind of thing, you're seeing commercially banks and financial institutions positioning themselves as providers of data, which is an interesting position to be in.
Yeah. And so to go back to your question, if I do have a last statement.
Sorry.
I would say today we've been talking about the differences in terms of who is using the software, what features are needed, how do we cover the difference between the different countries, and so on and so forth. And even if I hope this has been interesting for the audience, nothing is replacing a live demo of the tool, of the software, where you will see how you can deal with your own arrangements, how can you handle this. So I welcome everybody who would be interested to contact me, to contact us at BearingPoint, to organize a demo of the tool. We would be more than happy to show you everything we've developed over the last months. So please feel free to contact me, to contact us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, that's been really insightful to hear, someone with the expertise that Fabrice has got share their, the positives, the challenges. I can see BearingPoint's next marketing campaign is going to feature a Swiss Army knife. So on that, or maybe the choice, I like it. People don't always go into tax, but when you compare it to that of a career undertaking, then maybe, tax looks really good. So thank you very much for that. And again, I do hope that we can continue the DAC6 dialogue, and we at Hansuke, in collaboration with our partners, are leading the DAC6 discussion for the financial service industry. So please do join us next week, where we will be hosting a webinar on DAC6 impact for the private equity industry, and I will be joined by some leading experts on a panel discussion. You might have seen a prompt appear on your screen to register for that webinar. And until then, please stay safe and have a good week. Thank you very much, Fabrice, again, and to our audience. Goodbye.